Welcome back to the Rotoworld Basketball Show. I'm Dan Titus, joined with Raphielle Johnson and Noah Rubin. We are in week 19 of fantasy basketball. Some of your playoffs may have already started, so we're going to talk about the teams and players you need to target for the rest of the week. But if you're playing in a Yahoo Public League or Yahoo Default League, playoffs begin next week. So it's officially go time, guys. And unfortunately, this morning we received some disheartening news from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Jalen Williams is going to be out indefinitely. He's not going to be on the road trip with the Thunder. Noah, I'll start with you, man. What does this mean for an opportunity for a player like Cason Wallace or Aaron Wiggins?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, those are probably the top two guys that I'd be looking to target, specifically Wiggins. I think that he's had some really big games already when he's gotten the chance to start with various starters out. But Cason Wallace did start the second half in place of Jalen Williams after he exited early from their last game. So both guys should have some streaming appeal regardless of who ends up actually starting. It makes it interesting for fantasy because a lot of times we are looking at teams when a star gets hurt. It's like, which one of these guys is probably going to get minutes? And like, if it's this guy, like, do I really want to stream him? But the Thunder have legitimately like 4 or 5 guys that it's like they could step up, play legit minutes and be considered must stream guys. We just don't know exactly because it could be Alex Caruso, it could be Isaiah Joe, like such a deep team. But I think Wiggins and Cason Wallace have to be the priority. They have 3 more games this week, I think, which is just another factor that makes them more appealing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Wiggins and Wallace are at the top of the list in terms of guys to target. But like Noah said, it's kind of like the gift and the curse of this team. Like, while their depth is great for the team standpoint and how good they've been all year, it can be a little bit frustrating from a fantasy standpoint because you're not really sure who exactly to target. Like, one game, Isaiah Joe can come out, hit 4 or 5 3-pointers. Another Alex Caruso will give you a complete stat line. I think my issue with Caruso is the availability aspect. We've seen him get banged up on various occasions throughout the season. You hope it doesn't happen this week because he can be a very effective fantasy player when healthy. But I think I would stick with Wiggins and Wallace and go from there.
Yeah, the Thunder do play a back-to-back on Saturday, Sunday, so that could be a really critical pickup for those still battling for a playoff spot. Also, it's not good news out of L.A. Last week, LeBron James injured his groin. He's going to be out at least 1 to 2 weeks. Also, the Lakers have not seen Jaxon Hayes in the lineup or Dorian Finney-Smith. So, Raph, I'll talk with you first about, what can Dalton Connect potentially provide, or is there anyone else on the Lakers that you think might be able to fill in with so many injuries in their front court?
I think Connect can certainly provide offense. He started on Monday in Brooklyn. Had a decent night from a production standpoint. Gabe Vincent, maybe? It's been pretty ugly overall. The struggle to stay healthy being a major factor, but I think he hit his first 5 shots on Monday, had a really good game against the Nets. With all the injuries, I think it's almost out of necessity where he may be a factor in some of these deeper leagues, as you close out this week. And another guy I threw out there, especially for defensive purposes, is Jared Vanderbilt. He's not going to give you much as a scorer, but I think you can get some steals, some blocks, and some rebounds from him, especially with no Jaxon Hayes. Alex Len started on Monday, but they pulled the plug on that after 13 minutes. I think it's pretty obvious that he's not a starting caliber center in the NBA. So I think we're probably going to see a lot more of Jared Vanderbilt the rest of this week and maybe even next week as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine that Len continues to start, but he probably does continue to see around that like 10 to 15 minutes. I think it's Dwight Powell's always the guy that comes to mind when I think of that like starting center that plays 10 minutes and then that's it. But I would imagine Vanderbilt does spend a lot of time in like a smaller lineup at center. Yeah. But both Vincent and Connect, I think, are really good options if you need scoring and threes. I think the kind of issue we run into here is that there are some guys that are going to step up and play really well, but none of them are great like 9-cat players, unless you just need help in those categories. Because obviously we saw that on Monday. It was Luka and Austin Reeves had no issue setting up these guys for open looks, and they were hitting them, but they're not going to get you, like, you're not relying on Dalton Connect to get you 5 assists, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals as a starter. Like, it's like points, threes. That's it.
Yeah, I think Dalton Connect, at least the minutes are safe with Connect, playing 41 in his last game. I'd probably trust his opportunity more than Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent. But to your guys' point, like there's only so many things that Dalton Connect can do to really help you from a fantasy perspective. But I will say playing 3 games in 4 nights to close out the week is definitely going to be important for fantasy. So if you do like the Lakers, I would definitely look at them for this week specifically. Got good news out of Boston. Kristaps Porzingis was seen at shoot around today. He's been battling a illness that's been, pretty much just had him out for like at least the last 7 or 8 games. Al Horford's not really a guy you can rely on. He's been playing very well, but he does have his resting as well as the rest of the Boston Celtics. So Noah, where you stand in Porzingis's prognosis? Like, do you think we'll see him in the lineup? And if we don't, is Al Horford or someone else piquing your interest for the Boston Celtics in terms from streaming?
Yeah, Porzingis was kind of that weird case. I think it was last Friday. He had responded to an Instagram comment saying that, oh yeah, I'm going to play on Saturday. And then he didn't play. And then he tweeted out that it's like, they just don't know what's wrong with me. Like it's some sort of viral illness, but like, we don't know what it is, which is like concerning, but I think he's questionable tonight. Was that shoot around. So if he's back, then any streaming opportunity kind of goes out the window, but Boston does have a back-to-back coming up on Friday and Saturday. So if both Porzingis and Horford are available, maybe they stagger them for those, which doesn't, again, open up much streaming potential. But if there is a scenario where both of them miss one of those games, then Luke Cornett would be next in line, but he's been pretty hit or miss this year to give you classic center stats like rebounds, blocks, and a high field goal percentage, but doesn't always work out super well.
Yeah, I think I would just target Peyton Pritchard. Like, obviously, he's not going to be available in your deep leagues. There are some standard leagues where he may still be available, so I think that'll be the first place to look, regardless of what happens with Porzingis. I mentioned that back-to-back as well. You're going to get 2 games max out of Al Horford the rest of this week. And I think the same is probably going to be said for Porzingis. And there are a couple other guys in that roster as well who may take a night off for one of those 2. So I think Peyton Pritchard, we've seen Sam Hauser have his moments, and out of necessity, it may be a Luke Cornett night for one of those 2 games. Maybe that Brooklyn game on Saturday would be the one where you kind of target Cornett as opposed to Friday in Miami. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Celtics right now, fantasy-wise.
Yeah, slim pickings. Slim pickings. Yeah, you can't trust Al Horford at this day and age and at this stage of fantasy basketball. Raph, let's talk about your resident Knicks since you're the expert, man. How do you feel how have the Knicks been playing and faring without Jalen Brunson right now? And do you see Deuce McBride as a viable fantasy option the rest of the way?
I'll answer the second part first, and I'll say yes, because of the fact that it's either him or Cameron Payne at the point. And yeah, I think Deuce, he didn't play well against the Clippers, but he said he'd bounce back the following game against the Kings, and he did that. Made his first 5 shots. Really good night offensively. I think someone else to watch would be Josh Hart. The scoring isn't always going to be there, but he can certainly be a supplementary playmaker. And I think when you have someone who's more of a scoring point guard than Deuce McBride, there may be more opportunities for him to make some plays. Same with Mikal Bridges. OG Anunoby had a good game in Sacramento too. Tweaked his ankle, but remained in the game. So not too worried about that. And I think it's pretty much, Deuce McBride in terms of pickups. If you have Josh Hart, you're kind of counting on a bit of a bump in the assist category for these next few games.
Yeah, McBride's the main streaming option. Like, it's a Tom Thibodeau rotation still. Like, we're not going to have multiple players stepping up to fill out the minutes. But I think just looking back at their win over the Kings, like seeing both OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges have 8 assists, I think that was pretty encouraging to kind of see the ball spread around a little bit. But McBride is going to be the guy. I think the one caveat to that is that after tonight, the Knicks are one of 2 teams that only have 1 game the rest of the week, which kind of like McBride's good enough that I would still be looking to stream him in this role as a starter. But if you're just looking to maximize your games, there's a handful of teams that have 3 games between Thursday and Sunday, whereas the Knicks only have the 1. So it kind of, I don't know, it ends up being a decision to make that's not just based on how good he's going to be on the floor.
Yeah, that's really tough though, because if you do make it to the next round of the playoffs, the Knicks have like a really good schedule for it. They have 4-4-4 in terms of volume, some really good competition against some fancy friendly opponents. So, and then you don't know if Brunson's going to be back. Like back to the first question, Raph, it's like the Brunson injury actually probably happened at a good time for real life basketball because they were so dependent on Jalen Brunson. It's like, oh, let's see what Mikal Bridges can do. Let's see what he can do as a creator, and same with OG Anunoby. So I don't know. I don't see them rushing him back, but I don't know, man. It's Tibbs, and I feel like they
go ahead.
No, go ahead. You got it.
I was going to say, I feel like they have a big enough gap between themselves and 4 and 5 to where they can be a bit more conservative. And if someone has to walk into Tibbs' office and say, no, you know, we're going to have to hold off on this for a bit, I think they can probably excuse that. But yeah, that's always the question with the Knicks. But they've done a good job with Mitchell Robinson thus far in terms of his minutes as he comes back. So maybe there is some hope there.
Yeah, they definitely should have upgraded their backup position. And, you know, obviously getting rid of Jericho Sims they had to do it. But yeah, we'll see how the Knicks fare, man. I don't know if I'm as high on them as we were, but I don't know. They just got to get Brunson back at some point.
You're higher on Jericho Sims than I was.
So. I mean, is he better than Precious Achiuwa? Probably not.
I mean,
he's not great either. But
let's just
Clint Capella was available the whole time, Raph.
Yeah, I don't want to
just waiting for
anybody,
you.
So let's just.
But they what they should do is go into their development pool and give some of those guys some run. But anyway, it appears that Jonathan Kuminga might actually be returning to basketball. This dude's been out with an ankle injury for a while. I imagine this probably impacts Moses Moody the most. But Noah, what are your thoughts on Jonathan Kuminga coming back to the lineup? Do you expect him to have a minutes restriction? Is this someone that fantasy managers will even be like interested in trying to? Because I think I see him on quite a few waivers just because he's been out for so long. So is he worthwhile at all picking up?
I'm not super optimistic about it. I think, when he got hurt, it was like, I think Steve Kerr said at the time, like, we're going to look at Moses Moody more. But if we're looking at the way their lineup is now, he got injured a month before they got Jimmy Butler. And now they've had a month with Jimmy Butler, and Kuminga is just now coming back. So to answer one of your questions, I don't remember the order, but Kuminga, I would imagine, is on some sort of minutes restriction. Maybe like the main impact that I think is like almost a guarantee is that Gui Santos is kind of like bumped out a little bit. Like he's seeing fewer minutes, if any. But at the same time, it's Steve Kerr, and like he could try something one game, like it, go to it for a few games, and then change it all entirely. So we could see Kuminga's minutes fluctuate a good bit. But the one thing is, like, I don't really see him starting with Jimmy Butler on this team unless they go with some sort of lineup with Kuminga, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green. But I think the lack of spacing in that lineup, like having Quentin Post out there, has been great for them as a floor spacing 5, which is pretty incredible that it took them basically over a decade with Steph Curry, but almost a decade with Steve Kerr there for them to figure out like a floor spacing 5 alongside Steph Curry could actually like work really well. So I just don't see Kuminga getting enough minutes to be a guy where I'm like, you have to add him off the waiver wire.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You have the Brandon Podziemski injury that may open up a few more minutes, but like Noah said, the amount of time that Kuminga missed, he's certainly not going to be approaching like mid-20s and above in terms of minutes immediately upon his return. So I feel like this is more a move that's something to add another option for the Warriors come actual playoff time, as opposed to something that's going to really be beneficial for fantasy managers in these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, he wasn't really a good fantasy player even when he was getting, starters minutes anyway. So yeah, I'd be all right if everyone just wanted to leave him on the waivers. Let's talk about a good rookie though for the Washington Wizards. Kyshawn George has been a top 40 player over the last week, top 70 over the last 2 weeks. Raph, do you think that Kyshawn George is going to not only rise up the rookie ladder, but can he be someone that fantasy managers can trust for the fantasy playoffs?
I think so. Given his role and how well he's played recently, he certainly can be trusted. He's not a shutdown risk. Those young guys in Washington, they want to see what they all have and how they all fit together before you add a high lottery pick. I'm sure they're hoping for Cooper Flagg be first overall. So then we may have to revisit, Kyshawn's position. But I think he can probably be a starter either way just because of the ability to shoot the basketball, and he's a good defender. So I think he's in a really good spot for the rest of the season to be helpful for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I think, man, I really like Washington's rookie class. I wasn't like super high on it right after the draft, but I think Kyshawn George's development has been one of the most exciting things to me because he was a guy who was lower on the consensus heading into that draft. But the defensive production has been, like, especially over the past handful of weeks, has been incredibly surprising. And he's was known as a shooter coming into the draft, but has shot the ball really poorly this year. But kind of in the last few weeks, he's gone from borderline worst shooting percentage in the league to just regular bad. So just literally the last 2 weeks, 61st on Basketball Monster, shooting 39% from the floor. It's because of the defensive production, and the numbers in other categories as well has been pretty good. Like Raph said, he's going to start for the rest of the season. This entire core, they want to get them as many reps as possible. So yeah, I think Kyshawn George is a guy that I'd be looking to roster in as many places as possible. In the waiver wire column last night, I headlined him, and I think I have him in multiple leagues. He's a guy that I'm very high on.
What's his rostership up to right now? 25%. So
I think it was 25 when I wrote this last night. So
yeah,
maybe it's probably gone up a ton now that I wrote the column.
No,
but
it's still at 25. People need to listen to Noah.
I gotta listen, man.
Yeah, 25%. That's far too low. I'd be hard pressed that he's available in a 12-team league right now, but 10-team, definitely got to take a look. Let's talk about some. It's almost March Madness, man. So let's talk about some Big Ten, Big East basketball. March is here, and the dance is just beginning. After a regular season of big matchups and bigger upsets, it's officially tournament time. Watch the Big Ten and Big East men's basketball tournaments today, exclusively on Peacock. It's going to be a really good rookie class, so make sure you guys are tuning in, man. It's going to be a lot of good college basketball over the next several weeks. Really excited to watch. Let's talk about the rest of the week for Week 19, though. Noah, I want to get your feedback first on teams that you're going to target, players you're going to target for the rest of this week. Already talked about the Thunder, and now they have a back-to-back on Saturday and Sunday, but any other teams kind of pique your interest?
Yeah, so if we're just going to, maybe this isn't the case in every league, but a lot of the leagues that I'm in, I'm not able to make moves at this point for tonight. It's the waiver wire, the moves process in the morning. So if I'm just looking at the Thursday through Sunday games, the Nets, the Lakers, the Bucks, and the Magic all play 3 games. We talked about the Lakers a little bit already. I think in Brooklyn, guys like Zaire Williams and Keon Johnson are intriguing, and really there's a number of dart throws you can make from that team. If you're, again, just looking to maximize the games, the Bucks having 3 games, guys like Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr. are just not super exciting options, but they play more games. And the same thing in Orlando. I'm not super excited about a lot of those guys. I think Wendell Carter Jr. is still fairly under rostered, but he's not a super exciting player. But again, if you're just looking to maximize the games, then he's definitely an option.
Yeah, it just sucks for the Bucks, man, because I'm like, do you want to pick up Taurean Prince? Do you want to pick up Gary Trent Jr. and Kevin Porter Jr.? The schedule was so good for the Bucks in the fantasy playoffs, and it just sucks you can't really glean anything from that. But yeah, totally agree with the other options. Raph, who are some of the players your teams are targeting?
I'd still say Philly. I know we don't really want to talk about the Sixers on this show anymore at this point, but
break it, man. Lonnie Walker and Jared Butler are cooking right now. I'm for it.
Quentin Grimes erasure. We got to talk about my guy.
Quentin Grimes, he's 52% rostered.
Yeah, he's out the party.
If you're in a
10-teamer, he's certainly someone to target, not just for the rest of this week with their 3 games, but for the rest of the season. So him, I'd keep an eye on Adem Bona too. Look, they know what they have in Andre Drummond at this point. He's going to get you rebounds, high field goal percentage, but other than that, you're not going to get too much. And I think there's certainly some intrigue in terms of the way that Bona's played recently. So he's someone else to keep an eye on, especially in deeper leagues. He's way down at 13% rostered, so he's certainly available. So he's another player I'd have my eye on for the rest of this week.
Man, I'd argue that's too high. 13% have Bona. That's crazy. I mean, Yabusele's questionable tonight. I'm not saying he's going to play heavy minutes, but I mean, Bona showed us on a one game of production. I would be hard. I'd be hard pressed to trust him out of all the Sixers that we just talked about, because like I feel like his minutes aren't going to be trusted.
I feel you, but who else are you going to play, man? You can't put like Franklin out there, the mascot. He can't play. So it's like,
I was like, who's Franklin? It's like, what am I missing? I'm gonna check basketball.
Yeah. Like that's the thing. Like, who else are they gonna play at that position? And I think it'd be borderline malpractice for him to not play good minutes at this stage in the season.
We're talking about Sixers and malpractice. Come on, that's all they do is malpractice.
Yeah.
I would just throw out another name, Davion Mitchell of the Heat. If you're looking for points, assists, and steals, he's coming off a really bad game. Saw he tweeted something about dealing with adversity and all that. Frankly, the Heat need to blow it up, and I think it's getting closer to that. But Davion Mitchell's actually been pretty solid from a fantasy perspective. So I did pick him up in one 12-team league where I need some steals and assists. So I think you guys could do the same with 3 games left. Any other teams? Let me think
if I can add in one more little schedule optimization strategy. The Lakers, Magic, and Kings have back-to-backs on Thursday and Friday. And then the Bucks, Nets, and Thunder have back-to-backs on Saturday and Sunday. So you could do like somebody from one of those first 3 teams, the Lakers, Magic, or Kings, stream a player for 2 days, get 2 games, and then drop them and pick someone up from the Bucks, Nets, or Thunder and get 2 more games. So that could be like a great opportunity for like a guy like a Connect for 2 games and then drop him and pick up like a Zaire Williams or Aaron Wiggins and get 2 more games.
Yeah, that's really wise. What are you guys' thoughts on Davion Sharpe? Do you think he's like, I mean, you mentioned Keon Johnson and Zaire Williams, but do you think Sharpe has an opportunity? Because being that they have the back-to-back, Nick Claxton hasn't played particularly well, and Noah Clowney's been kind of hit or miss. So, yeah, what's your guys' thoughts on him?
I think he's played pretty well. Again, it's another situation where you have a team that probably doesn't need to be in the play-in and is looking to do what they can to avoid that. So they run someone who's probably going to play more minutes down the stretch. And Claxton, they already paid him. They pretty much know what they're going to get from him on a nightly basis. So I would say even if he's healthy, his minutes are probably going to get tapered down these next few weeks.
Yeah, I think for the rest of the season, I agree with that. I think right now my issue with Davion Sharpe, probably like very short term until like at some point I imagine Claxton gets shut down, is that now that Noah Clowney's back, there's just too much of a logjam there. Like Clowney will play some time at the 4, but like since Davion Sharpe had that one spot start where he was a monster, he hasn't played 20 minutes in a game. And I don't love that lack of upside there. I think if you would have said, okay, the Nets have a 5-game week, like streaming him at the beginning of the week, you could probably deal with some like poor games just because you're maximizing and getting 5 out of them. But at this point, I'm not super optimistic about Davion Sharpe having another 25, 15, 5, 2, 3 game with 2 threes, like unless he's starting. So,
yeah. Another team that has 3 games is the Utah Jazz. Kyle Filipowski, 36% rostered. Definitely trending up. Keontae George is out today. So that's definitely a team you could target. Bryce Sensabaugh, any interest in picking him up? He's more of a 3s points guy, but I haven't picked up any spots, but just thinking of Keontae George out, he probably has a bigger opportunity there.
Yeah. Well,
Johnny
Juzang for points and 3s. Yeah. Juzang's a good one.
Have you picked up Johnny Juzang in any leagues?
Hell no. Like it's been good to see him out there, to be honest with you. But
I'm surprised his lasted this long, man. Like that was UCLA, right?
Yeah.
Started at Kentucky, then transferred back home.
Yeah, I'm surprised he's still. I mean, hey, it's the Jazz. Got to be careful with who I say I'm picking up because Noah and I are in the midst of a playoff battle right now. We'll see how that. We'll let you know how that ends up next week. But Yeah, Raph just fell victim to a lot of injuries, like many of us are dealing with right now in fantasy basketball. It's like The Walking Dead, man. It's just hard to manage this week. But let's talk about the playoff schedule though. So if you're in a Yahoo default league, your playoffs start in week 20. Raph, what are some teams that you like or players that you think might have some rest of season value through the week 20 playoffs, which run from March 17th to April 6th?
We've already talked about Washington. They've got a 4-4-4 set up for weeks 20 through 22. So no need to spend much more time on them. But I think San Antonio, Stephon Castle is at 48% rostered. So he's still going to be out there in some 12 teamers. He's someone to keep an eye on with that 4-4-4 setup that the Spurs have. There are no out of whack weeks. I think Dallas and Orlando have 2-game schedules for week 20. So those are the 2 teams to avoid for next week if you're in a first round matchup. But everything else is either going to be 3 games or 4 games for those upcoming weeks here from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, I think the only other one, maybe a couple other guys from Indiana or Sacramento are probably the 2 teams that I would add in. They also have 4-4-4. Only a handful of teams do, and we've already talked about a handful of them, like the Lakers and the Knicks as well. Obviously we just, like Dan mentioned it, McBride has that excellent schedule coming up. Indiana has a number of guys that are kind of fringe roster guys that just getting the extra game can help. And then I think probably the only player that qualifies as a legit streamer in Sacramento is Keon Ellis, because obviously Valanciunas is stepping up with Sabonis out, but I was looking at his roster sit percentage. I think it's in the 80s on Yahoo.
Yes.
Blew my mind because I thought he should have been rostered probably nowhere before this injury. But no, I think it was just that many people when he was just backing up Sabonis. Yeah, I think probably what happened is at the beginning of the season, people were drafting him when he was in Washington, and we're
right,
stop checking my league because I don't care anymore. It's too good. And then he just stayed on everybody's roster, and that's probably the reasoning behind that. But he should be rostered everywhere at this point.
Yeah, he got down, I think, to 65 maybe when it was real bad for him when he was getting benched. But did we get an update? I know Sabonis was supposed to be updated or reevaluated on Tuesday. Have you guys seen anything on Sabonis's prognosis?
I have not.
I haven't either. So I guess either it wasn't good news or it wasn't worth sharing. So Jonas Valanciunas could be one of those waiver pickups that you didn't expect to be a league winner. Speaking of league winners, wanted to talk about Naji Marshall for a second. The Dallas Mavericks, as you mentioned, Raph, only played 2 games in week 20. You wouldn't go to the lengths of dropping Naji Marshall. He's pretty much in that Kyrie Irving territory of fantasy value right now, right?
For sure. Where else are they going to turn? Obviously Klay Thompson, his shot attempts have increased significantly. He's been more aggressive, but he's already rostered in most leagues. Spencer Dinwiddie has pretty much been what Spencer Dinwiddie has been in terms of fantasy basketball for most of his career, if we're being completely honest. Naji Marshall, he's someone you definitely have to hold on to. I don't know if I would say you have to hold on to, say, Max Christie. He's at 25% rostered. He might be someone who's kind of a fantasy casualty for week 20 just because he hasn't done enough to justify being held onto for a 2-game week, I think.
Yeah, I think my only fear with Naji Marshall, and it's not enough of a fear for me to drop him because he's been fantastic, is PJ Washington's questionable tonight. And if he returns, are they hey, Naji Marshall's playing too well, we can't bench him, we'll just start them at the 4 and the 5? Or are they hey, Kessler Edwards has been our really good small ball center, we don't want to bench him, and Naji Marshall's been a really good 6th man, let's push Marshall to the bench? And everybody's why? But it could happen. And so I think that's my one fear, but Naji Marshall's been too good for me to really, I guess, take action because of that.
Yeah, I think I was left with, outside of Naji Marshall and PJ Washington, probably, maybe you could say, I don't know if I'm holding on Klay Thompson, honestly, because he's just really giving you threes and points. So, yeah, after this week, I think you could cut bait with all those fringe guys to look for those players that have more advantageous schedules, more quality games. trying to think of another team that I really liked in the fantasy playoffs. Oh, I already mentioned the Bucks, that they have the most quality games, but you just can't really trust streaming from anyone on that team. So,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about each week of the fantasy playoffs, so we'll definitely have more insight on what teams to target next week as we hit the midway point. But yeah, I think starting off next week though, the Knicks, they play 3 and 4 nights. The Pacers play 3 and 4 nights. The Lakers, the Sacramento Kings. So like those are, as they already touched on, those are the best teams to kind of look at if you're going forward to kind of get started in the front end of the week, and then you can pivot as you're getting your production throughout. Let's talk about NBC Sports Now channel, because you can watch the biggest names in sports talk, including Mike Florio, Dan Patrick, Dan Le Batard, and Matthew Berry, as they cover the biggest moments on and off the field each weekday on the NBC Sports Now channel. It is now available on Peacock and free on most streaming platforms. Learn more at NBCsports.com/now. So I talked about Naji Marshall for a second because he's probably one of the biggest silly season league winners that we've seen this year. Jonas Valanciunas also gets a nod. Noah, who's another player that you think has kind of emerged as a silly season league winner, or do you think could potentially be that?
I think a lot of it to me is what I've been looking at is those games played. So I don't know. The one off the top of my head is Caris LeVert. And I don't even know if that qualifies as like a silly season guy, but he's been so good since joining Bucks. I guess not silly season in the sense that the rest of his team is getting benched and that's why he's going to play well and things are getting quote unquote silly. But he's just going to he's been so good as a reserve for Atlanta. And I think that his role is pretty safe. He's played so much better than he did in Cleveland. I think he's basically kind of like the backup point guard for Atlanta. So it's points, it's threes, it's assists, it's steals. So I think that's the first one that comes to mind. If you have any better ones than that, Raph.
Yeah, I think in terms of teams that are definitely not going to be in actual postseason contention, I think Kyle Filipowski would be a pick for me, just because of what he's done in Utah. Even when he's come off the bench from Walker Kessler's been available, he's gotten good minutes and provided solid production. So he's one. And in terms of a team that is looking to contend for a playoff spot, I think we mentioned Keon Ellis earlier. I'd certainly have him in there. Just because between the Monk and the Sabonis injuries, he's had to take on a larger role, whether it's starting when Monk was out or being that primary reserve when Valanciunas was moved into the starting lineup. So I think he'd be someone else I would probably project as like a silly season winner in terms of fantasy.
Yeah, I think those are all fair choices. I think we talked about Kyshawn George a lot. I think he's going to be one of those guys too. And trying to go down the list here of just people over the last 2 weeks that have been balling.
Would Quentin Grimes count? I know he's over 50% rostered at this point, but he kind of exploded over the last month. So,
and who knows what he could do going forward too, right? Like he could be putting up ridiculous numbers with the Sixers tanking.
I think I'd add in another Sixer. Sorry, I just want to stay on topic here and make sure we talk about Dan's team as much as possible. But
I saw your little sneak in your little Caris LeVert there. You had to talk about Hawk one time.
Yeah, we already talked about the Knicks already, so I had to make sure we get at least one mention of the Hawks. But Jared Butler, I think, is a guy the past 2 years for Washington has been a really good silly season guy. Like last 2 weeks of the season. And he's getting that earlier with Philly. And I think the fact that Maxi's kind of been out for a little while, Jared Butler's getting more opportunities as the point guard. And we've seen whenever he gets minutes, he gets a ton of assists. And it almost begs the question of like, why isn't a team playing him more early on in the season? But we don't have to like dive into that because I'm sure there is a legit reason. But what I know is that when it comes to like mid-March for the rest of the season, Jared Butler is going to get me a lot of assists.
Yeah. He's definitely become like a playmaking. You can count on him for like 15 points and 6 assists. Like I think that's a fair, especially with him starting and getting more minutes. And it's like, why were the Sixers even debating there? I think I saw Kyle Lowry was like ruled out. It's like, why is Kyle Lowry even with the team right now? Like, just let the young guys play.
Home, man.
Yeah, I think Butler's only 24 years old, something like that. So yeah, this is a really good opportunity for a lot of the young guys. And speaking of young guys, I'm really surprised that Richaun Holmes has been 6th-round value over the last 2 weeks. That's one guy that I'm like, can't. Do we need to revisit this? But like, he produces even when he's off the bench, man. Like,
yeah,
he had almost a double off the bench yesterday. So I don't. That's silly season for you. Let's talk about some rest of season values, because there's a couple of players here that we're going to talk about, some that we've already mentioned, that have been playing outrageously over the last several weeks, even, beyond that, even a month. Between Christian Braun, who's been Brown. I said Braun. Christian Brown,
it's
who's
spelled
been
like Braun. That's why.
Yeah,
that's what that's what everybody thought when they first read it, and then it's like, no, it's pronounced Brown. It's like, oh, okay, my bad, but no, I get why you do it.
Yeah, totally messed that up. Christian Brown, 24th in BBM over the last 2 weeks, versus Donte DiVincenzo, who's been 37th in 9-cat leagues over the last 2 weeks. Who do you take, Brown or DiVincenzo?
I'm going to take Brown. I didn't think this is like, if we ask this question, say October, there's no way you're taking Brown over DiVincenzo. But the way that he's played throughout the season, also Donte, he's been good, but he's still coming off the bench. I don't read too much into that because he's still getting good minutes. But I think with Brown, you're gonna get well over 30 minutes per night, and he's been productive too. So I'm gonna go with Christian Brown for the rest of the season here.
Yeah, I would too. I think unless you're just really desperate for threes, but I think just overall Brown's been better. And just looking ahead, next 3 weeks, Denver plays an extra 2 games. If your leagues are going past that, then good luck. But I mean, both those guys should be pretty safe for the rest of the year. I don't feel like either of them would get benched outside of, but perhaps the last game or two. So they should be pretty safe options. But I would lean Brown.
Yeah, that's a landslide for Brown. I think it hasn't been talked about enough. I mean, obviously it's the Nikola Jokic effect, and we didn't talk about him getting 30-20-20, which is just absolutely absurd. like stuff. If you're doing stuff that Wilt didn't even do, that's just unheralded. But it's the Jokic effect, and he just makes people better. But I don't think people have been talking about how efficient Christian Brown has been. He doesn't hurt you in any category. He doesn't turn over the ball. He shoots efficiently from the field. He can get you some steals. He gets you moderate rebounds for the position. He's just a really good fantasy player. And I'm trying to think of a comp. I don't know if you guys maybe have one of like who he's similar to or his fantasy profile is similar to. But as long as he's tied to Jokic, man, like he needs to be more respected in fantasy. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see his draft stock rise going into the next season. Any comps?
I'm not a player comparison guy, so I can't really help you there.
Like an efficient guy that can give you 15-6. Yeah, I'm gonna think on it. I know Noah's got to have someone's doing. Have you not written about Christian Brown before? I feel like he would have been one of those.
Christian Brown. I'm just player comps end up being weird to me, so it's like I have to either have a really, really good one, or I'm like, he's just Christian Brown, but he's like. He is so tied to Jokic. That's what I was trying to think of, like somebody that's just has been really, really good, but was tied to a really good passer. But there's nobody like that that's also like a shooting guard that's shooting 56% from the floor.
Right, so right. It's so unique. Yeah. So put some respect on Christian Brown's name. We just talked about Caris LeVert. He's been 41st over the last 2 weeks. Keon Ellis, meanwhile, has been 44th. I have a funny feeling we're all going to choose Caris LeVert here, but Noah, what say you?
I'm going to choose Caris LeVert here. I think, not that that's super surprising. It's not biased at all, I promise. But I think Keon Ellis, a lot of what his value is tied to is being in the starting lineup. Like when he's coming off the bench, it's very hit or miss. He can sometimes still have like a 5-steal game or like a 7-3 game when he's coming off the bench. But for the most part, his best games have been as a starter. Like unless Malik Monk / Zach LaVine / DeMar / Keegan Murray gets hurt for a game, he's going to be in a reserve role. And I just trust Caris LeVert as a reserve more than I do Keon Ellis.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. LeVert's role is solidified. We know where he's going to be in that rotation every night out, while Ellis can be a bit more of a wild card in terms of whether he's going to start or come off the bench, depending on injuries. So, yeah, I think I would take care of LeVert in this one as well.
No disagreement. It's a little bit boring, but it's the truth. LeVert, that's the guy that I have rostered on my team. He's just been great since he came over to the Atlanta Hawks. Can't really trust Keon Ellis, and his stocks definitely bump up his value. Unfortunately, I think this one was put in here probably before he got injured. But Josh Giddey been 29th over the last 2 weeks versus Derrick White, who's been 17th. Knowing what we know now, and Josh Giddey still dealing with an ankle injury, we don't know when he's going to play next. The Bulls definitely have nothing. Well, I mean, they're pretty firmly in the 10th spot right now. I don't know if they rush him back, but maybe we just take the time to appreciate Josh Giddey's play over the last month or so. I mean, this dude's been a really great asset for points, rebounds, and assists. He's actually been hitting his free throws. He's shooting efficiently from the field. He's even hitting threes. Like, maybe this guy turned the corner in his career. Like, last year, we were talking about Josh Giddey as – actually, now I think about it, Josh Giddey was really good at the silly season last year, but he was terrible before that. So maybe this is like one of those Jalen Green effects where he just plays really well at the end of the season. But I saw on Real GM today that he's going to be looking for point guard money on the market. Do you think the Bulls re-sign him based off what they've seen over the last, month or so of the season? I'll start with that, Raph, before we get into the player debate.
I would say, I don't think they should pay him like starting point guard money, but then we saw what they did with Patrick Williams last July. That's my concern there. Like, he's been really good. Giddey's been excellent before that ankle injury, which unfortunately happened right as he was about to notch a new career high point total. So he wasn't able to do that, but he's been excellent. Like, if he were healthy right now, I'd probably take him over Derrick White in this conversation just because of how well he's played in his role within the Bulls rotation. But obviously that point is rendered moot since he's not healthy and will probably miss a few games. But in terms of the money, you look at the money that starting point guards on like contending teams or teams that fashion themselves as being contenders. I don't think you can pay him that kind of money, especially with the Lonzo Ball contract that they signed. Like, obviously Lonzo's injury history makes that a bit of a gamble, but I don't think you can pay him like 25, 30 mil a year personally.
Yeah, I think this ends up being more of like a team philosophy question because like he's played well enough recently to kind of earn a big contract. But if I were a GM, I don't know if I would be giving him that kind of money. But I think, like Raph said, like just looking at what Chicago's done recently, maybe they're just kind of like, well, he's earned it, guys. We have to pay him what he thinks his market value is and what he's played like, even if they're being honest with themselves and say, hey, can we win a championship with Josh Giddey making whatever that amount of money is per year and starting at point guard? And I think the rest of your team has to be pretty insane for that to happen. I'm never like, no, you can't win a championship with this player starting, but I think it's the amount of money that would be tied up and where you're going to get the like rest of the players required to make that happen. So not super optimistic about that. But as far as the injury, there was just an update like 10 minutes ago saying that he was basically like iced his ankle like all night after injuring it. That he's already out for Thursday's game, but they're considering him day to day. So what does that mean? I don't know. I think Chicago hasn't been great about injury timelines this season, but maybe it's not something that keeps him out for the rest of the season, which would be good because he has been playing really well.
That's an important update because, I mean, the last several ankle updates we've gotten, it was like, oh, he's out 2 weeks. Grade 1, grade 2 sprain. So if he's day to day, that's probably good if you have Josh Giddey rostered. I do think that they're going to re-sign him just because that's just a Bulls thing to do. I don't know that they have championship aspirations. Like, the owners of that team.
That's a great point.
The owners of that team own the freaking White Sox, who are like I mean, they might as well be the Oakland A's or the Sacramento A's, whatever they are now. So yeah, they don't care about winning. They just care about make your team winnable enough to get into the playoffs every year and have nothing further to gain from it other than revenue. So yeah, I think they're going to make a bad decision there. But Derrick White has been a top 20 player, second round value for the better half of the last 2 weeks. Now that Jrue Holiday's kind of fallen off, and I don't think anyone's really talked about that either. Maybe it's just the Celtics cruising, but he has not been good this season at all. From a fantasy perspective, I dropped him months ago. As we're starting to firm up the playoff positioning here, do you see Derrick White being relied on more, Noah, down the stretch because of the play or the drop-off of Jrue Holiday? I mean, Peyton Pritchard, Raph mentioned already, he was probably going to be one of the biggest benefactors of any play down the stretch or any resting. But how do you kind of see Derrick White's value the rest of the season?
Yeah, he hasn't missed a back-to-back. Just looking back at this real quick. He's missed one leg of one back-to-back this season. But I would imagine that changes kind of as we continue to wind the season down. Boston has a 5.5 game lead ahead of New York, and they're 8 games behind Cleveland. So at some point, they're probably just going to say, there's no reason for us to continue to play our starters every single game. I wouldn't be shocked if that started this weekend with their back-to-back. And it already has started with some other guys, but it could have started with Derrick White as well. But when he's on the floor, I trust him a lot. I do worry about Boston resting him. That's what happened last year as well. And it was very, very frustrating. Now they don't have the massive lead over everybody else, but they are pretty much locked into the 2 seed.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot for New York to chase them down for the 2 seed, especially with Brunson out. So, like Noah said, we're probably going to see more of these guys take the occasional night off, even if there isn't a back-to-back, just to get prepared for the playoffs, because they know what they have. They know what they are as a team in terms of their championship pedigree. So it's more about just making sure you're healthy, and that's about it. Make sure you're healthy. Make sure your guys are sharp enough going into the playoffs where they aren't coming back ice cold. So, yeah.
Yeah, Derrick White's just been a really good and consistent fantasy asset for anyone that drafts him. Definitely one of the better defensive-minded guards that we have in this league. And just as long as he can keep his teeth in, man, I think he'll be all right for the rest of the season. I don't know if y'all saw that, but he has to keep on pushing off his dental surgery. So he keeps on getting his bridge knocked out. But that'll do it for the Rotoworld basketball show. We'll be back. Hopefully you guys will make it to the fantasy playoffs as well. So we'll be talking all things fantasy basketball in the fantasy playoffs. For Noah Rubin, Raphielle Johnson, Dan Titus, we'll see you next week. Peace.